This conference will now be recorded.
In yesterday's session, we were discussing about variables. That there are different types of variables like input variables, local variables, and output variables. So we were discussing about local variables yesterday, and also we started discussing about input variables. So in Terraform, we can use input variables to customize our Terraform configurations, or we can reuse our Terraform configurations by passing values to the input variables, and we can use those input variables in our Terraform configurations. So we can use Terraform input variables where we can declare a value in only one place, and then we can use that value in other parts of the code and files by referencing them. So this approach is more efficient, and it is going to make the code reusable and composable, as I already told, right? We can assign values to those input variables, and we can refer those input variables in our Terraform configurations. Note, we already discussed, we are going to use variables. We are going to use a variable block. In Terraform, variables, the input variables are defined using variable block. The input variables, basically, the input variables in Terraform, we can define variables inside a variable block, inside a variable block, right? Inside a variable block, and we are going to define like this: variable followed by the name, So here we are giving a labels, right? This is like a name for that variable. This is like a name for that variable, and within that variable block, we can define the arguments. It is like this: variable, that variable name, and within that we have a arguments, for that variable, arguments for that variable block. So we discussed already what are the arguments we can define for in the variable block. What arguments can be defined in the variable block. We discussed few yesterday. What are those, guys? What are those? We discussed a few arguments, right, yesterday in the variable block. Input input is not variable block. Arguments inside. Arguments, I'm not asking type of variables. I told arguments in the variable block. The arguments in the variable block. The arguments in the variable block. What? Come on, guys. We told type of the argument, description description of the argument. What else? Type, description. What else? And there is something called default, to assign the default value. Then again we have few more. Not only this, we have a few more arguments within the variable block which we can define. Those are like a validation, and nullable. We will discuss all these things. And sensitive, sensitive. Like this, we can define the arguments within the variable block. So within the variable block, you can have arguments. Within the variable block, you can have arguments. Those arguments are like this: type, default, description, validation, sensitive, nullable. Nullable. So you take any variable block, you take any variable block, you take any variable block. Within that variable block, that is within that variable block, you are going to define the type of the variable, the description for that variable. If required, you can define the default value for that variable, and a validation rule for that variable, and whether that variable can be null or not, whether the variable is a sensitive variable, whether that variable is a sensitive variable. Like that, you can define arguments in that variable block. Yesterday we discussed about few, right? Type of the variable, right? Type of the variable, like that. Now, if you see the official documentation, also there is a detailed documentation. Terraform variables. If you see the official documentation, also there is a detailed way what is what. As I already told, Terraform has some concepts like variables, right? Variables concept, we have input variables, we have a local variables, output variables. We discussed about local variables. Now we are discussing about input variable. Every input variable can be defined or can be declared. Every input variable can be declared using variable block. Variable block followed by variable name. The arguments for a variable declarations, when you are declaring a variable, you have a different types of arguments. Type, what type of argument it is, and the default value, which then makes the variable optional, and the description, what is the like for what purpose we are using that variable, and if required, we can have a validation rules. Addition to the type constraint, you can have a validation on the variables, based validation on the values we are assigning to variables, and if required, you can inform whether the variable is sensitive. So if we make this variable sensitive, the Terraform will not display the variable value wherever it is printing, and if required, we can specify whether this value of for that variable can be null or mandatory. Like that, we can define. These are like arguments we can use in the variable block. So if you see the arguments, variable block, arguments, what arguments we can use while declaring the variable in the variable block. While declaring the variable, what arguments we can use? The type, description, default, validation, nullable, sensitive. When we are declaring the variable, we can use these arguments. But everything is optional, but it is good to define what type of argument it is. Type constraints. Type constraints in the sense, you take any argument, any variable. There will be different types of variable, right? Different types of variable, like string, number, boolean. The type constraint, using this type constraint, we can specify what type of variable it is, but again it is optional. This type constraint, the type argument in a variable block, allow you to restrict the type of the value that will be accepted as the value for that variable. If no type constraint is set, then a value of any type is accepted. If you don't specify a type argument in the variable block, any type of value will be accepted. But while type constraints is optional, it is recommended to specify them. So they will be helpful for users of the module, and they will allow the Terraform to return an error message if the wrong type is used. Terraform can return a message if the wrong type is used. The type constraint, using type constraints, you can specify the type of the variable. There are lot of types. There are different types. Right? Primitive types, complex types, like that. Primitive types. Primitive types are simple types. Variable types. Types of variables. You have lot of types. They are primarily categorized as primitive types or simple types. Primitive types and complex types. Like primitive types, like a string, number, boolean. These are like a primitive types. Which means simple, 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 right? So primitive types. Primitive type is a simple type that is not made from any other type. Primitive types like a string, number, boolean, like this. These are like a primitive types, or we call it as a simple type. Primitive type or a simple type. Like string, a sequence of characters. I hope you know any programmatic language basics, right? What do you mean by string? Any programmatic language you take, you have these data types, right? Variable types. So string, it's a sequence of characters. String, it's a sequence of character, something like this. A sequence of characters. A sequence of characters that represents some text. String, a string is like a sequence of characters. It represents some text. Example, let's say hello, right? Or something like this. Is it like a sequence of characters? Just to give an example, or something like this, some meaningful. Can I consider this as a string type, string variable, like this one, this one? Yes. So string, sequence of characters, string. What type of variable you can define using type constraint? You can specify what type of variable it is. As I already told, even though it is not mandatory, even though it is not mandatory, even though this is not mandatory, it is recommended. The type argument in a variable block allow you to restrict the type of value that will be accepted as a variable. If no type constraint is set, then a value of any type is accepted. While type constraints are optional, we recommend specifying them. They can serve as helpful reminders for the users of the Terraform modules, and they allow Terraform to return helpful error message if the wrong type is used. If the wrong type is used. Is everyone clear? What do you mean by this type constraint or type in variable block? There are different types of variables we can define. We can declare a different types of variables like string, number, boolean. These are called as a primitive types or simple types. Number, that can be any valid number. That can be valid number, a numeric value. Number is nothing but a numeric value. A numeric value. The number can accept whole numbers or fractional numbers. The number field can accept whole numbers or fractional numbers. Whole numbers is like 15, 10, 15 or 10 or 20. Can I call this as a number? 20 or 2 whole numbers, and fractional numbers such as 6.2, 6.1, just to give an example. These also considered as a numbers. These also considered as a numbers. A numeric value. That value can be a numeric value, can be a whole number or a fractional numbers. Clear? What do you mean by number? This is nothing to do with the Terraform. I am just explaining the types of variables. The data types, we call it. Any programmatic language you go, there is a data types, right? String, numbers, booleans, list, map, object, like that. Is everyone clear? What do you mean by number type? Now boolean values, right? So these boolean values, only two. What is that two values? The value of the boolean type is only two. What are those two? Either true or false. Either true or false. Either true or false. These are like a simple types or primitive types, right? The types of the variables. And we have something called complex types. Complex types. A complex type is a type that groups multiple values into a single variable. That groups multiple values into a single value. These values can be similar types or different types. List. The complex type, it can be a list, or it can be a set, it can be a map, or it can be an object, right? The complex types, the complex type, like list of same type, or set of same type, or map of same types, or we can define objects also. So the complex type list of variables, I mean to say list of some strings, or list of numbers, or group of numbers. I mean to say list of numbers or list of strings, like that, or a set of strings or set of numbers, like that, or maps. You have different types of complex, right? We will understand what do you mean by list, what do you mean by map, what do you mean by list, what do you mean by map, we will understand. We have complex type like list, set, map, and object like this. So list, Terraform list variable is a sequence of similar values, sequence of similar values, sequence of similar values indexed by numbers starting with 0. It accepts any type of value as long as they are same type. Let's say I can create a list of users. I want to create a list of IAM users, right? I can use a variable type list of strings, and I can define the list of variables, and I can define a maps, I can define objects. We'll come to this complex types later, but is everyone understood? What do you mean by type here in the variable block? What do you mean by this argument called type when you are defining a variable? It's a constraint. What type of variable it is? What type of variable it is? So you, if required, you can define list of types, list of same type. Just to give an example, suppose I want to create IAM users, more than one user. I can specify that as a list, that as a list, variable type list, variable type list, and I can define the default values for that list also. I can define the default values for that list also. So I can say type list, variable type as list, and I can define list of variables of same type, list of values of same type. We'll come to this list set map and object later. Is everyone clear what do you mean by this type constraint in a variable block? Any confusion? Any confusion here? Again, it's an optional value. Again, it's an optional argument, but it is good to define. Now, the default value, even though you are not assigning, it will use that default, the description. So we'll come to this validation, nullable, sensitive, sensitive, this will come to later. Let's start at least writing some Terraform code using variables. Using variables, let's start creating a variables, declare the variables and start typing like this. As I already told, all are optional only. All are optional. I no need to define like this. Just to give an example, suppose I can just define a variable like this. I can just define a variable like this only. I can just define a variables like this. But now, if I don't specify the type constraint, can I pass any type of value? That can be a string value, that can be a boolean value, that can be a number value, or that can be a list or objects or map like that. For this one, if I don't define the type constraint here, yes, but that is not a best practice. That is not a best practice. You can take type constraint, because let's say here I'm referencing that variable, but if I don't specify the type, is Terraform will accept a number, I mean to say string or list also as a value for this variable? Yes. And will it cause the problem? Will it cause the problem wherever you are expecting a number? You are expecting a number, but if you are passing different type, will it cause the issues when you are running the Terraform configurations by passing those values? Yes. Let me show that. Let me show that. Guys, as I already told, you can pass variables multiple ways. You can assign variables. Using this variable block, what we are doing? We are defining variables. Using variable block, we are defining variables. Using variable block, you are defining variables. But if required, there are different ways to pass the variables. How? Let me show you. How we can pass the variables? Let me show you. Let me go to that code. Let me go to that code. I have that code here. And here I have that code. Let me go to variables folder. Now I have that code here, the Terraform code. Here I have defined a variables. I am referring the variables, but there is no values assigned for that variable, and we are not assigned a default value also. Now there are different ways we can pass the variables. There are different ways we can pass the variables. The one is this one. First we can pass the variables. We can pass the variables using when it is prompted. Provide input variables when they are prompted during plan or apply. So since I have not assigned any default value also, it is going to prompt when I say Terraform plan. When I say Terraform plan, right? It will prompt, it will ask, it is asking the variable. Do you see? Is it asking? Since I have not assigned default value and I am not passing in any other way, is it expecting the default? I mean to say, is it prompting the value for that variable, whatever we are referring? Is it asking as an input from us now? Since we have not set the default value also. Now I need to provide the value as an input. As an input, I need to provide the value when it is prompted. When it is prompted, that is what here. That is what they are saying. Assigning a values to the variables. When variables are declared in your Terraform module, they can set in a number of ways. When variables are declared in your Terraform configurations, your Terraform module configurations, they can set, we can set the values, we can assign the values for that variables multiple ways. One is when they are prompting. Also we can set. Since we have not set, it is asking, it is expecting, can I give whatever value I want to give that time? If it is prompting, that can be any AMI ID, like this. I can take some AMI ID and I can give that value. When it is prompting. When it is prompting, I can give something like this. When I am saying Terraform plan or Terraform apply also, count, I will say count as one. Since it is not, I will come to that. Let me give count as one. Now press enter. And Terraform is using these values for planning those resources. For they used these values in your configuration, whatever you used. Same thing you need to do when we are applying also. When you are applying also, you need to do the same thing. It will expect you to prompt. I mean to say, it will accept you to give something like this, and it will use these values and create a resources. This is one way. Yes, let's proceed. This is first way, but if you see, there is some bad request. What it is saying? One second. Invalid AMI ID. There is a space here. That's why it is giving that option error. Let me give without spaces. There is a space here. When I copy pasted, there was a space. Let me give without space this AMI ID. Now value, count value, I'm giving one like that. So it will create a resources using those variables. But is it expecting an input from the user of Terraform? Are we going to pass variables like this in real time? When it is prompted, are we going to pass variables like this? Is it correct way? Whatever way I am assigning a variables, is it correct way? No, because there should not be any human intervention. And there is another way to pass variables. There are multiple ways to assign the variables. Instead of this approach, we can assign the variables. Multiple ways. Yesterday we discussed one of the option. Let me destroy this. Terraform destroy auto approve. There are multiple ways. What is that way? Terraform destroy. One second. Let's destroy. There is a type. Let's destroy. What is the other way? creating a variable.tf, creating variable.tf, that is for defining the variables again. If you just, what you do in the variable.tf file, let me destroy this, Terraform destroy. For destroying also it is asking, like this. So let's destroy. Balaji is saying by creating a variable.tf file. What you do by creating a variable.tf file? You are just going to define variables only. You are going to just define variables. You are declaring variables. What you can do using variable.tf file, you can just have variables declaration in a separate file. That's it, right? Now let's say what I can do. You are saying, sir, you can create a variable.tf file. Okay, I'll create a variable.tf file. What I will do in this variable.tf file? This is just for having the variables declaration. Instead of having variables, you instead of declaring the variables or defining the variables in this file, you can just separate these variables to a separate file. That's it, using this variable.tf file. The way you have terraform.tf file for defining Terraform related configurations, using variable.tf, you can just make it variables defined in a separate file. That's it. Now, if I define like this, again, are we assigning values to this variable like this here? No, right? So this is like you are defining in a separate file for better maintenance and readability. Now, we can just define for a better readability and maintenance only, but you are not going to assign like that. So there is a different ways. Let's go one by one. But before I go, how to assign? Let's say I have defined a variable. If we are not assigning a value, at least you can, while defining a variable, you can assign the default value. At least you can define the default value, which means if you are not assigning the values, Terraform will use whatever default value you have set for that variable. That is what the use of default. Right? So we discussed yesterday. So we can set the default, but let's say even though I'm not setting default, if you are not setting the default and you are executing Terraform plan or Terraform apply, it will prompt. Now, while even though we have not set the default value, you can pass your own values using, yesterday we used one option. What is that option? Did you guys remember yesterday session? Using argument, CLI argument. Using CLI argument. But if required, you can set the default. Can I say default here? Can I set some default value? If you are not setting, it will take this one. If you are not assigning, it will take this one. Can I say default like this? Default value like this? Which means if you are not assigning, it will take this as a default value. Now I am not assigning anything. Since I have defined the default value, when I am saying Terraform plan, Terraform apply, Terraform destroy, is it using the default value now? Is it prompting for me to type the value for that variable? Now, is Terraform is prompting for me to type the value for this variable like that? No, because we use default. The default. Is it taking the default value now? Is it taking the default value now for that variable wherever we are referring? We are referring this variable, right? Here we are referring. AMI, var.ami id, count, var dot this variable name we are referring. Is it taking the default value now? Whatever has been defined there? Yes. Now, if you don't pass, when you say Terraform apply, Terraform plan, it is going to use the default value. Is everyone clear? What is the use of the default attribute? The default attribute in that argument, in that variable block, the default. Is everyone clear? The default. Where I am talking about this one, the default. So the use of the default argument, right? If present, the variable is considered to be optional, and if no value we set, if this default is present in this variable block, if this default is present in this variable block, right? If the default is present in the variable block, the variable is considered as optional. The variable is considered as an optional, and if no value is set, the default value is used. If no, if no value, if no value is set, the default value, the default value is used. The default value is used. Is everyone clear? The what is the use of that? This one, the default argument in the variable block. This one, default, a default value which makes the variable optional, which makes the variable optional. A default value which makes the variable optional. If no variable, if no value is set, the default value is used. Okay. Description I already explained. Description I already explained. So this specifies the documentation, for kind of a documentation, for what purpose, you are using that variable. This specifies the input variables documentation. So by looking at this, I may not able to understand, right? If required, can I specify description like some meaningful, the AMI ID, to be used for EC2, just like this. I can see a description, number of EC2 instances, EC2 instance count or number of EC2 instances to be created like that. So is everyone clear this description also now? Whatever we discussed. Now we can set the default value like this, and it will use when you are applying, when you are planning, when you are destroying. You no need to define also, that variable become optional. The variable become optional. Let me say Terraform destroy, to destroy the whatever resources has been created. Whatever resources has been created. If I go to cloud, the EC2 instance has got created. The EC2 instance got created using that variable. You can see using this AMI, whatever default ID I have provided, using that AMI, one instance is created. The default value. Now let's destroy this. Now we can override these default values. We can override these default values by using CLI argument. By using CLI argument. Yesterday we discussed, right? Yesterday we discussed. We can override this default value. We can override this default value using CLI argument. What is that option? Right? Hyphen var, hyphen var, hyphen var. Let's say when I am saying Terraform plan or Terraform apply, Terraform plan or Terraform apply, I can say hyphen var, that variable name, and its value. Let's say the default value is 1 for this this one, the variable name. What is the variable name? The variable name is easy to count. The variable name is easy to count. Now I am saying easy to count. I am saying 2. Now, what is the default value for this variable in our Terraform variable declaration? 1. Now I am passing 2. I am passing 2. And even though I am not passing AMI, even though I am not passing AMI ID, is it going to use whatever is the default we have given there in that variable? Yes. Now let me execute Terraform plan. Let me execute. I am just saying Terraform plan. Now do you see 2 resources to be added like that? Since I am using that variable in my Terraform configuration, I am referring that variable here, the count, where easy to count. So now how many resource of same type is getting created because of that count meta argument, and the value is 2, right? And it is going to create 2 resources. It is going to create 2 resources, and AMI ID the default one. But since we have not specified the type constraint, does customers can give something like this also? Something like this also. Now if this is given, is Terraform configurations will work as expected? Now I am passing value as a Balaji. Now what it is saying? Invalid expression, a number is required. Why number is required like that? It is saying count expect what value? We discussed count beta argument will expect what value? Number. So number. Now here I have not specified the type constraint. So does Terraform can accept, I mean to say, can we assign any type of variable for this variable? That can be a number, string, like that. Yes, we can assign any type of variable because we have not specified the type constraint. But it is recommended. Now can I say type as number like that? Number instead of like this, the type number. Now you see, when I am assigning something like this, when I am assigning something like this, do you see here itself unsuitable? It is giving some kind of a message, unsuitable value for this variable. So number is required. A number is required. This variable type is a number. So please assign number like that. Is it giving a message? The Terraform, is it giving a message because of the type constraint? Now, unsuitable value for this variable. Unsuitable value for this variable. A number is required. Why it is giving a number is required like that? The validation is happening at the variable level now. Here itself you can see, right, the error, where error it is saying invalid value for input variable. Read the message. It is saying invalid value for input variable because we have defined like this. Is it saying invalid value for this input variable because we are passing string like that, we are assigning string like that? Yes. So is everyone clear why this is recommended? Even though it is optional, why it is recommended? Is everyone clear? Now I created a Terraform configurations and you are using the Terraform configurations. Now if I specify type as a number, it will give you a message, invalid value type, invalid value type for that input variable. For this variable, you are trying to assign an invalid value. Clear? What do you mean by this type? The type of the variable. As per your requirement, you can define string, you can define numbers like that. Is everyone clear what is the use of this? The type argument in the variable block are not clear. Now if I use type as argument, it is giving some kind of a message. Now can I say number, whatever number, that can be 1 or that can be 2, like that can I pass? Now it will only expect numbers. Now since I am passing the number value, then it will use that value. Now if I say Terraform apply also, if I say Terraform apply also, it will create two resources. It will create two resources using that AMI. Using the default value, it will create two resources. It will create two resources. It is creating two resources in the background. It is going to create two resources in the background using that default AMI ID. Now, if you understand, is variables are making our code reusable and composable. Is Terraform code is now reusable because of this input variables? Can we reuse this Terraform code or configurations without modifying my Terraform configurations? Am I able to reuse my Terraform code? Yes or no? We are able to reuse our Terraform configurations, right? Now, if I see, since I have executed Terraform apply, I can see two servers. Two servers got created. Two servers got created. Two servers got created with that default AMI, whatever default AMI ID, default AMI ID, the default AMI ID, right? You can see this AMI ID is used. Let's destroy. Let's destroy this. Let's destroy this Terraform. Destroy. Now, if required, can I pass or can I set or can I pass multiple variables using var argument? Yes, I have said, I know I have assigned only one value, one variable value. If required, I can assign multiple variables also. Can I use that hyphen var one more time to pass one more variable like that? Yes, let me show that. Now, if required, uh, if required, I can use hyphen var multiple times. Suppose now Terraform plan or apply, I can use hyphen var the variable name, one more variable name, this variable name AMI ID, and I can use whatever value, whatever value. Let's say I'm giving something like this. I'm giving 12. Since this variable type is string, do you think this will be allowed? This will be allowed by that variable. Since I have defined the type constraint, since I have defined the type constraint for this variable as string, do you think this value will be taken? This value 12 is this value can be assigned to that variable AMI ID variable like this? No, because it's a string type. It's a string type, so it will not allow. It will not allow. If I say something like this, it will not allow like that. And you need to assign some kind of a string number. Now, if required, you can put the validation also. If required, you can put the validations also. Using this validation, there is something called validation, right? Using this validation, you can put some kind of a message. If you see, perfect example for this one, if it is not starting with AMI, if it is not starting with AMI, you can throw error also. Suppose you can put validation like this. the condition, the validation on this variable. So the length should be greater than 4 letters. The length of this string, length is a function in a string function. The length of this value should be greater than 4, and I'm substring. This is like a functions. We will discuss later functions. Now it should start with the AMI like that. Now if I put some kind of a validation, it will throw error now. If you see, I'm using something like this. Now is it giving that message, that validation, using validation block, using validation argument? I'm doing some kind of a validation on that value. Validation, this validation will take condition. Length is a function, string function. I'm expecting the length of that value, that length of that string should be greater than 4 letters, and the first 4 characters starting with the 0 and first 4 substring. Substring is one function in the string. It should start with AMI hyphen like that. Now I am passing something like this. Since I am passing something like this, since I am passing something like this, is it doing the validation as per that validation rule? Is that is the Terraform is doing some kind of a validation, and is it giving the error message? Whatever I have given, the image ID value must be a valid AMI ID. It should start with AMI hyphen like that. Can we can do validations also. We can do validations also like this, using this validation block, using this validation field. We have this validation, right? A block to define validation rules. Additional to the type constraint, you can do some kind of a validation. This validation, you can specify the custom validation rule. You can specify the custom validation rules for a particular variable, adding a validation block within the corresponding variable block, something like this. Now if I take Balaji also, if I just don't have a validation, if I just don't have a validation, it will take something like this Balaji also as a string. Type constraint is fine, type constraint is fine, but it is a kind of a correct only. But when I say Terraform apply, is AWS will throw error, is AWS will throw error saying that invalid AMI ID like that. There is no AMI ID with the name Balaji, right, in AWS. Now if I apply, it will say invalid AMI ID like that. We are going to get 400 bad request, invalid ID Balaji, because there is no AMI with this ID. If required, I can have additional validations also, validation, right? And within this you have a message, you have a condition, you have a condition, and you have a message. Message whatever you want to give, message whatever message you want to give, you can define that message. Error message, error message, error message, I can say some meaningful, whatever you want to display, whatever you want to display, something like this. Whatever the image ID value must be a AMI ID like that. So you can give something like this. The AMI ID value, the AMI ID value must be a valid AMI ID, something like this. Some, it should start with it should start with something like this. You can specify, it should start with something like this. You can specify something like this. On what basis it has to display the error message? On what basis it has to display the error message? You can define the condition. You can use some kind of a functions also. Length is one function, length is one function, string function, length is one function. Guys, there are a lot of functions. Terraform, we will come to that functions later. Terraform string functions, Terraform string functions. We have various functions, right? Like any programmatic language, we have a lot of built-in functions. For numeric also, we have max function, min function, that is for numeric. And a string, for string also there are various type of functions. You can have length, you have a length function, substring function like that. Length is one function, length is one function. It is going to give what, how many characters are there like that. and substring is one function. Substring is one function. You can see substring is also one function. It is going to return, starting with the index values, it is going to return only whatever you are looking. So you can use upper function, lower function, like that. So length is also one function. So I am saying length, that variable, that var dot AMI ID should be greater than 4. Greater than 4. It should be greater than 4 letters, like that. Just to give an example, it should be greater than 4, or you can say it should be greater than 10, it should be greater than 5. The characters, the length of the variable, you can define like this: greater than 4, greater than 5, like that. And some other condition, substring, you can use substring function. You can use substring function, something like this. Substring, and that var dot AMI ID, you are getting the substring, by passing starting index number, like that, 0 to 4, like that. So it will expect, it is going to return whatever you are passing, first 4 characters. This is going to return first 4 characters, right? It is going to return first 4 characters, and you can say that should be something like this. That should be something like this. The first 4 characters should be exactly like this. This is kind of a validation. This condition is based on your requirement. This message is also whatever custom message you want to give. Using this validation, right? You can perform the validation, custom validations on the variables, whatever you are assigning. So custom validation rules. You can specify a custom validation rule for a particular variable by adding a validation block within the corresponding variable block. Corresponding variable block. Is everyone clear? What do you mean by this variable also? Based on your requirement, you can define. Now, if I say, if I pass Balaji like that, since Balaji is not starting with the AMI hyphen, is it giving that validation message? Whatever validation message I am giving, is it giving the AMI ID? Value must be a valid AMI ID. It should start with AMI hyphen, like that. I am passing Balaji, but it is not matching with that validation rule. Now, if I don't pass default value, if I don't pass default value, if I don't pass default value will be used. If I don't pass default value will be used. If I don't pass anything, default value is used. Whatever value I am using here. Whatever value I am using here. The default value. The default value will be used. Right? You can see the default value is using. The default value is using like this. But if I have to pass, I need to pass the correct type of the variable, and that if I am using a validation, it has to satisfy that validation also. Now let's say if I want to pass another AMI, instead of Red Hat AMI, I can pass Amazon Linux AMI also. If required, I can pass Amazon Linux AMI also. If required, I can pass Amazon Linux AMI also, something like this in that region. Like this, I can pass AMI ID, this one. Now, is this value type is string, and again, is that validation is also successful? I have just given validation. It should start with AMI underscore, like that. The validation is also successful. Now it is going to use that value to create a instances AMI ID. It is going to use whatever value I am passing now. Whatever value I am passing now, this value. Instead of default value, this value is used. Is everyone clear what do you mean by validation here? This again. Guys, you can use lot of functions, string functions, lot of string functions. Let's say, can I use a variable for availability zones also? Instead of hard coding the availability zone here, let's say, instead of hard coding the availability zone, can I refer that also as a variable? Can I pass this variable based on my requirement also? Now, can you guys tell me how to do that? Now, can I define a variable like this with whatever name, like something availability zone, something availability zone, like this availability zone. This is the variable and variable and the variable name. Now here, can I set some default value? Type, I can set a type should be string default value. Can I say something like this, the default AP South 1A, something like this. Description, the AWS availability zone, AWS availability zone, like this, AWS availability zone name. Now here I can refer, how I can refer? Here I am defining a variable, how I can refer? Using this argument, var dot that variable name, var dot that variable name. Now let's say, let me destroy whatever has been created. Let me destroy whatever has been created. Let me destroy whatever has been created. Let me destroy. Let me destroy whatever has been already created. Let me destroy and reuse this code again. Now my requirement, I want to create the EC2 instance in 1B availability zone. Without modifying my Terraform configuration, can I reuse this Terraform code by assigning a value to that variable? Without touching my code now, can I create my EC2 instances in 1B availability zone? By overriding, I mean to say by assigning a value. If I don't pass anything, as I already told, if I don't pass anything, what is the default value it is going to use for this variable? Whatever I have defined here, default. Default. But if required, can I pass arguments, or I mean to say, can I assign value to that variable at runtime, like that, using the hyphen var, like that? Yes. So now let's say I am saying Terraform apply whatever. If let's say I want to create only one instance, let's say I want to create only one instance, I can say the default value is fine. Otherwise you want to create two instances, okay, hyphen var, now availability zone, this is the variable name, now availability zone equals to AP South 1B, like that. Now if required, you can pass AMI ID also, but I am not passing AMI ID. It will use default AMI ID in that whatever I have. Now is my EC2 instance, two EC2 instances will be created in 1B availability zone if I pass like that. Now you can see availability zone. You can see availability zone. Here you have availability zone. Is it using whatever availability zone I am passing? It will be created. It will be created as per these values. 1B availability zone. Let me say yes. Let me say yes. Now it is getting created. The EC2 instances are getting created in 1B availability zone. In 1B availability zone. In 1B availability zone. If I go here, it will be created in 1B availability zone. Let me refresh. Let me refresh. You can see, is it getting created in 1B availability zone? And again, I have set the count as 2. Since count is 2, is it creating 2 servers in this availability zone, whatever I'm passing? And the default ID, AMI ID, it is using because I have not passed anything. The default value is used. Is everyone clear? Now let me destroy. Let me destroy whatever has been created. Just for practicing purpose, I am creating all these things and I am destroying. Now, let's say there is no validation. There is no validation. It may cause issues, right? If you pass instead of a valid availability zone ID, if you pass something A, B, C, X, Y, Z, is AWS will allow? Suppose availability zone name you are giving A, B, C, X, Y, Z like that. AWS may that provider the plugin may make required API calls. It will fail. It will fail there. Can I have some kind of a validation also if required for that variable? Some kind of a validation. Some kind of a validation. Some kind of a validation you can ask. Guys, don't go to advanced concept. I am explaining step by step. We just started variable. There are various ways to pass the variables. Default value I have told. Now I am using -var option. Like this, there are 3-4 options are there. There are 3-4 options are there. We'll come to that one by one. Don't go to advanced concept. Okay. Now I want to do some kind of a validation. Let's say sometimes people is giving something like this, something like this, some invalid, some invalid. Is this a correct availability zone for that region? Is that a correct availability zone? Suppose people are giving like this. Is it a correct availability zone? Now type constraint is satisfied. Type constraint is satisfied because it's a string. Type constraint is satisfied. It is not giving any validation message. And if I proceed, right? If I proceed, it will fail. 400 bad request, 400 bad request, invalid, invalid availability zone. For that region, this is not a correct availability zone. Now can I have some kind of a validation as a safe side if required? Guys, this is based on your requirement only. It is not like you need to mandatorily have a validation for each and every variable. It is not like every variable you need to have a validation. Based on your requirement, can I have a validation on that variable also? Error message, error message, error message. Please specify correct availability, some message, availability zone name, like that. And condition, on what basis this validation? I can use something like this also, length substring, or there is something called contains. There is something called contains. This is one list function. There is one function called contains. You can say the value should be within that. The value should be within that. I can say contains. Contains. There is one function called a list function. Contains. That value should be, the value should be within this list. It should be either AP South 1A, or it can be either AP South, it can be either AP South 1B, South -1B, whatever variable you are passing, it should be part of this list only. It should be part of this list only. I can say var dot this availability zone, that value, that whatever value we are assigning to that variable, that should be part of this, that should be part of these two only, like that. Now I am adding some condition. Now let me show that I am passing something like this. I am passing something like this. Now, since I have added a validation for that variable, since I have added the validation for that variable, is it specifying, please specify the correct availability zone name? If required in your message, if required in your message also, you can specify. Like this, specify any of these, any of this. You can specify the message also. You can specify the message also. You can specify the message also, either like this or like this. You can specify your message, whatever message. Otherwise, you can get the availability zones, list of availability zones also using data block. Using data block, you can get the list of availability zones. Using data block, you can get the list of availability zones. If you guys remember the list of availability zones, there is a data block. Using data block, right, you can get AWS underscore availability zones. Availability zones, you can assign to some value. This can be availability zones, some name you can give, availability zones, and you can refer this one also here to display some meaningful message. So you can refer that here also if required. You can refer that in the message also here. You can refer, please specify the correct availability zone from this list like that, from this list like that. Data block, you can use data block reference. You can refer the data block. You can refer the data block, or whatever you have assigned, you can assign to some local variable. If required, you can define some local variable. Availability zones, this is like a variable name. List of availability zones, list of agents, you can give something, list of agents, and you can here you can assign that data dot availability zones like this. This you can use either here as a function, or here also you can display. You can here also you can display something like this, local dot. In your message, you can specify local dot. You can specify like local dot this list of agents like this. You enter only from this one also like that. You can specify, guys. Let me do the Terraform validate. First, let me do the Terraform validate on this script. Then I will show Terraform plan or apply like that. Terraform validate. One second. One second. There is something. Error message variable availability. Only variable itself. Okay, not local. Okay, here we can refer only variable. So that is fine. Let's leave all these things. You can specify. You can specify, or this you can assign to some variable also. If required, you can assign this to some other variable also if required. Instead of locals, you can assign this to some other variable also, and you can refer that variable. Anyhow, you can leave this. You can specify. You can specify some kind of a meaningful message. AP South 1A, AP South 1A, or AP South 1B, like that you can specify. But there is a way. There is a way also. You can assign this data block to some other variable, and you can refer that variable. But in this validation, what it is trying to say, the error message for variable can only refer the variable itself. Only you can refer the variable. You can't refer another variable like that, they are saying. So let's leave this. Now, let me show that. Now I am passing something else. I am passing something else. If you see, it is giving some kind of a message. It is giving some kind of a message, right? Please specify the correct availability zone, either like AP South 1A or AP South 1B, like that. It is all specifying, because whatever value I am passing, is it in this list? Is it in this list? Whatever value I am passing, is it in this list? No. So that's why it is failed. Now, can I specify something like this? AP South 1B, like this, if based on my requirement also. Now it is going to, the validation is also successful. The validation is also successful. So is everyone clear? The conditions, you can use whatever condition you want to use, whatever condition you want to use based on your requirement. You can validate the variable values also. Now, is it taking that whatever I am passing? And that is part of that validation rule also, AP South 1B, it will accept. But except these two, will it allow any other value? Except these two, is this variable, can we assign any other value except these two as per this condition? As per this condition, no. So is everyone clear? This validation, lot of advanced use cases, but you may not going to do all these things. Just for explaining the concepts, I am explaining all these things, validation, like that. But many of the variables, you will not have validations only. If required, you can do validation on your variable, whatever you are assigning. Is everyone clear whatever has been discussed today? Is everyone clear whatever has been discussed today? Any questions? Any questions? Let me destroy whatever has been created before I wrap up the session. Let me destroy whatever has been created before I destroy. So tomorrow also we have a class, because last in this week one day I have not taken the class. Tomorrow also we have a class. Tomorrow we will discuss, there are other ways to pass the variables. There are lot of other ways, like you can use environment variables. You can use environment variables to pass the values, and you can provide values. You can provide input values using variable files. There is a terraform.tf-var files. There is a auto.tf-var files, like that. There are other ways to pass variables. We will continue that tomorrow, guys. That's it for today. Try to practice whatever has been discussed. Just play around with variables. Play around with variables. From here, I'll continue tomorrow. There is other way. You can define a, you can assign a values, and you can pass the values using variable like a .tf-var files or auto.tf-var files, like that. I'll continue tomorrow. So tomorrow same time. Tomorrow same time. 6 o'clock, 5 o'clock only. Evening 5 o'clock, same time. Thank you, guys. That's it for today. I'll continue tomorrow.